We've got the man himself, Rich Rines, one of the core DAO contributors and just all-around fabulous individual.
We just crossed 600 million TVL, which is awesome. I think in the beginning of this year, it was like 3 or 4 million. So we're at 200x in the last 6-7 months.
Fairly hardcore Bitcoin holders are starting to accept that, hold on a second, I can actually use this thing as a tool.
But you're going to see Core, call it, shift a little bit from being, just the best BTC-Fi platform to the best platform.
Why is it called dual staking? What is it about this process that you guys are doing specifically?
That's such a critical thing that so often has been forgotten in crypto.
Blockmates Orange is sponsored by Core Network, the ultimate Bitcoin-powered EVM-compatible blockchain. Learn more about Core at blockmates.com.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Blockmates Orange. We've got the man himself, Richard Rines, one of the Core DAO contributors and just all-around fabulous individual. He knows what's going on at Core, and I've managed to get him off his busy schedule to come and join us. Lots to talk about. We've obviously spoken to Rich before in the past, but I wanted to catch up with him because they've got a new launch coming out called Fusion. Bitcoin, LSTs, it's all happening. I think today they just hit 600 mil TVL on the network. So if you were wondering whether Bitcoin DeFi was a serious thing, I think 600 million should get your attention. Rich, welcome. It's good to have you. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. Awesome to be back. Always excited to chat.
Yeah. So funny thing was that before we started the pod, I was actually doing kind of like a review of what you guys were busy with and what was happening. And I said, geez, you guys are cooking, hey? And then you showed me a tweet that you sent a couple of days ago where we are cooking. So yeah, let's just kind of recap, what's been happening, what's happened, what's happening, and we can get into what's coming.
Of course, happy to give kind of an overview of where we're at today. So Core has continued to grow its lead in everything BTC-Fi, which is great. We're number one in every conceivable Bitcoin DeFi metric, which is awesome to see. And as you rightfully mentioned in the beginning, we just crossed 600 million TVL, which is awesome. I think in the beginning of this year, it was like 3 or 4 million. So we're at 200x in the last 6-7 months. So pretty impressive growth numbers there. One of the things that hasn't been reported on or talked about as much has been the growth in daily active users. Core is now, I believe, top 15 chain in daily active users. We actually surpassed Ethereum one day last week. So we're seeing some pretty good growth on that side as well. Because again, it's not just about having liquidity. Are people actually using the products that are built, right? Is there product market fit? That's such a critical thing that so often has been forgotten in crypto. It's just been kind of a TVL story. It hasn't been, all encompassing. On the Bitcoin staking aspect, we recently got, I think, just scraped 8,000 Bitcoin. It's like 7,950 or something. So it's almost 8,000. So we've seen quite a bit of growth there as well. And I think the Bitcoin hash rate has held pretty consistent around 55% of the network, although I expect that to increase relatively soon as well. So when you mentioned, a lot of different cooks, there's a lot of things going on. I think that's very true to the core spirit, is trying to empower this amazing community that we have of around 7 million folks, this amazing builder community of hundreds all around the world, to try to give the opportunity for them to go run the race of Bitcoin DeFi and hopefully build a winning product.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Glyph. Glyph is a non-custodial decentralized exchange operating on the Core network. As you know, we've spent a lot of time focusing on Bitcoin DeFi on this podcast, and essentially what Glyph is doing is replicating what Uniswap has done on Ethereum. So they are obviously dedicated in developing a sustainable and innovative DEX on top of Bitcoin, much like Uniswap, and just taking this whole Bitcoin narrative to the next level. So they've got a unique non-custodial approach which allows users to retain ownership of their Bitcoin while enjoying the benefits of a decentralized exchange experience. Their website is glyph.exchange, and you can go and trade a variety of assets there like BTC, USDT, USDC, and a lot more. Go check them out. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that I realized is that with a lot of new ecosystems, not that you guys are really new, but kind of like finding your momentum, you always have maybe one or two protocols that kind of like steal the light. But what I've noticed about Core at the moment is that you really do have like a very even spread, around like up and comers, obviously more established. You got Colend. I know that you guys are busy working with Solve as well. They made a big announcement. Just talk to us kind of like around that philosophy that you guys have clearly like spent a lot of time and a lot of effort nurturing and kind of like incubating those relationships. Just give those guys an opportunity as well in terms of like, what your experience has been with them and where they are at, and most importantly, like what their prospects are looking like.
So if I was to explain, the philosophy that Core takes ecosystem building, it's, long-term games with long-term people. And that's very influenced by the Core team and the community that we attract on the builder side of people who have experience building things in the past and understand maybe the Web 2 way, if you will. And how I first categorized, the launch of Core is when we started to chat with many, many teams, they would talk about heads I win, tails you lose type deals very commonly. And that's very frequent in crypto, right? If you think about it, so many teams just grant shop. The moment the grant is gone, you move on to something else. There's no loyalty. There's no long-term value accretion on both sides. And I view that as totally toxic. Like I come from, 10 plus years of partnerships, being a CEO, et cetera. And in that, it's all about finding win-win deals, right? Like how do we add value together? And I think that has shown, it's really shown through the approach ecosystem building, which is finding teams that we can really partner with on the BD side, on the marketing side, on the community side. Like how do we forge these long-term relationships where all parties win? And most importantly, all parties have a chance to build a real business. And it's a very different approach to ecosystem building than many other groups take, where it's just a press release. And then you can never even, find your DevRel's contact again. I'm probably in half these groups, right? Personally, trying to, make sure people are looking at things. So again, it's a very long-term ethos and long-term focus. And you mentioned, some of the wonderful partners that we have. So again, you mentioned, Colend, the largest borrow lend. They're actually came through our head of ecosystem, Adam. He's done some of those folks for years. Solve, a group that we, actually met recently and have, built an amazing relationship with. I think they actually just today announced they were raising the cap on Solve.core, the LST that's powered by Core Yield. Pell Network, the leading restaking protocol. They're also, homed on Core, and that's a relationship that's been formed, over the past several years. So again, it's a very like old school, approach in many aspects. But at the end of the day, that's also what sets our ecosystem apart. Is there's lots of these winners who are very focused on the core ecosystem. It's not just maybe a multi-chain, like escapade from day one. It's really about trying to build long-term value. And one of the more exciting parts of the ecosystem now is actually some of these projects are gearing up for their token launch. And that's a big step in terms of ecosystem maturity. The last ecosystem that really celebrated, getting to that phase was Ton. And, Ton predates Core by many years. And I think we're going to see, maybe Aptos and Sui are, kind of on the precipice of that. They also predate Core by some amount. But this is a huge step for us because it's allowing, builders that are on top of Core to now complete that ecosystem milestone of being able to get your token into the hands of users beyond just the DEX launch, which again isn't a bad thing, but people benefit from the centralized liquidity. So that's been a long time in the works. We're super excited to, to be able to play a small part in that story. Obviously, these teams and those entrepreneurs are responsible for 99.99% of that. And we play, just a very small role, but it's awesome to see the ecosystem take the next step. And then on top of it, kind of in true Core fashion, we don't celebrate that for too long. It's all about how do we go out there and go find more amazing teams. And you're going to hear, I assume on this podcast, actually, many of these folks not far from now, because there's a whole crop of new folks getting ready to launch on Core.
Excuse me. I was very fortunate to obviously interview the Colend guys quite early in their journey in terms of like, almost like they knew where they wanted to go, but I almost got the sense that they were like, okay, well, we're still figuring things out, but we know what the goal is. And it's really cool to actually see that they've now reached that point where they've almost like in many ways arrived. It's kind of like we've arrived. We're going to do this. We've got all this TVL. They actually got quite a lot of TVL kind of locked in as well. They've got a lot of like product market fit is there. And it's like, it's so cool to see. I mean, I know that it's like, I mean, I know it sounds cheesy, but it's really cool to see when you got founders you're starting out. I mean, they know, these guys know what they're doing, but it was almost like, well, we're on this journey, and I just love that kind of thing. And it's great to see, and it's going to be great to get them back in and chat to them again post TGE and just see like, okay, so there was this idea on what reality was. Is it the same or is it different? You know, and it's like, but you're 100% correct. I think it's like, I mean, you guys are reliant on protocols being successful. That's your business. You know, at the end of the day, that's where you guys are going to create an environment that will generate income and obviously make the ecosystem sustainable. If you looked at where you guys started to where you are right now, similar kind of scenario to like where the way that I described Colend, how do you relate to that, you know, and where you guys are at right now? And don't tell me that you're only getting started, because I know you are, but you know, it's kind of like, what's changed like from that kind of like feeling and that vibe?
So people, I give you one like tangible example. People now tend to not start with the heads I win, tails you lose type deals. So
Nice. Good
I think we've
answer.
reached, yeah, we've reached some level of maturity in that point of view.
Okay.
My honest view is we're still, 1% of the way through the core journey. I think there's so much opportunity in Bitcoin DeFi, whether it's on the yield side, the platform side, et cetera, to really reshape the traditional financial system. And we won't stop until we achieve that goal. And all of these milestones are really great, right? Like, we celebrate the 600 million TVL. Like, those are all wins. And people work really hard, not just on our team, but with these partner teams to, help make all these things a reality. But we're really just scratching the surface, and it's going to be continuing to stack, win after win. And until we do so, I don't think we'll be satisfied. This is a 10, 20-year journey. Like, we've only been live for less than 2 years, so there's so much meat left on that bone. And again, it's what gets me so excited to come to work every day.
So let's get into that meat that you so eloquently have presented, and that's obviously this whole idea that we have the most valuable crypto asset, which is Bitcoin. And it's like, how do we now harness the value of Bitcoin? And the answer is a very simple one, and that's, well, we want to collateralize Bitcoin so that we can earn yield, and we can lend and borrow and do all those beautiful things that obviously Ethereum demonstrated to us, all those years ago, and still does. And the whole idea behind that has been obviously met with resistance. You and I have chatted about it many times, but it almost feels like the process of education has now reached a point where even your fairly hardcore Bitcoin holders are starting to accept that, hold on a second, I can actually use this thing as a tool, and I don't necessarily risk what it is that I'm actually holding as a Bitcoin maxi, or even if I'm not a maxi. I mean, the best example is that's what Michael Saylor's been doing. He's essentially borrowing off the back of his Bitcoin. You guys are now doing it in a permissionless way, and people can still hold the custody of their Bitcoin. Just talk us through that mechanic, because I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot of people that are listening to this podcast are going to be like, what the hell is Jerry talking about here? So, yeah, give us kind of like the machinery and the ideas behind what you guys have done.
So normally you and I are in alignment on most things. What I would say on this one is we're not quite in alignment in terms of like the education component here. And
Okay.
I tell people, in addition to being chief storyteller, I'm also, chief educator. And if I think about, the level of understanding of, Bitcoin staking or BTC-Fi, we still, again, barely scratched the surface. Like, your average Bitcoin holder doesn't know what's out there. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a challenge that we collectively as an industry all have to work through. But this is a 10-year educational process, I think. I don't expect it to, overnight change. But there's also a lot of, cobwebs to dust out, right? Your BlockFi, your Genesis, your Celsius. Like, there is a lot of resistance there to also work through. And that, again, just takes time. Like, time does heal all wounds. And I think how I kind of think about it as like a general mental model is there's a continuum from people who know nothing about it or want to take absolutely no activity with their Bitcoin. And that's a very large amount of Bitcoiners. Then there's a next swath after them that is people who are ready for Bitcoin staking. And then there's a very small contingent that's ready for full Bitcoin DeFi. And small still is exciting, even in Bitcoin terms, because it's over $1 trillion asset. So like even small is still appealing and larger than most other ecosystems.
Yeah.
Where we've been spending a lot of time is what you started with, which is on the Bitcoin staking. And Bitcoin staking is our answer to how people begin their process of putting their Bitcoin to work. And that's actually a fine stopping point as well. You never need to go into coming on chain. You can stay totally off chain. And how Bitcoin staking works is you time lock it to yourself on Bitcoin L1. And by doing that, you have no risk other than just duration risk, right? So because you're time locking it, you can't move it, you can't sell it during that minimum 10-day window. But beyond that, your keys, your coins, please don't send me your Bitcoin. There's no multi-sig involved. Like, it is designed to be safe for the most ardent Bitcoiner. You only have to go trust Bitcoin. And again, I've been in Bitcoin since 2013. I want to build a product that I myself would use, that would stand the test of time, and that also critically could be used by both retail and institutions. And this is how Core unlocked earlier this year the first yield-bearing Bitcoin ETPs. And there's a lot of work left to be done on that as well. But it was to build this really easy to understand for any Bitcoin holder to earn passive yield for the first time. And that yield is paid in Core tokens, and they can claim those on the Core chain anytime. So it's also easily understandable from a yield point of view. And that's the other piece that we always tell people: if you don't know where the yield's coming from, you are the yield. So you have to understand the complete system there in the underlying mechanics. And as part of this Fusion upgrade that we announced that will come out here not far in the future, we're actually also introducing the concept of dual staking. So historically, when you stake your Bitcoin on Core, you receive those passive Core rewards. You will still be able to do that. That is not going away. However, now you will have the option of also staking your Core. And if you stake Core on top of the Bitcoin, you will earn increasingly higher amounts of rewards. And the idea here is to build on the security agreement that we already have with Bitcoin and now form a capital agreement. Because what we are trying to do is to blend the Core community and the Bitcoin community. So we've talked a lot about Bitcoin alignment over the years, and I'm sure there's a bunch of podcasts where I, wax philosophically about it. But that Bitcoin alignment piece is really critical, because ultimately we have to not only educate, but actually make them part of our community, because ultimately what Core is trying to do is scale Bitcoin. So this is the first, let's call it like vote with your wallet type piece of that process. And we've had a lot of great interest in this, and we expect to see quite a bit of Bitcoin dual staked not far after launch. But yeah, happy to talk about BTC-Fi stuff as well, but it feels like a good stopping point with the prompt that was given.
Why is it called dual staking? What is it about this process that you guys are doing specifically? Is it because you're locking your BTC and then using that as a medium of collateral? What is the kind of like the dynamic, or I suppose the definition thereof, around dual staking in the Core ecosystem?
So great question. The dual staking refers to staking both Core and Bitcoin. And again, you'll always have the option of just doing one, but now you get rewarded for doing both, is the way to think about it. But there is no wrapped Bitcoin or Bitcoin derivative that comes out of this, because that would violate this product's mandate, which is to be a only duration risk product.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so in terms of the process from a user experience, so I've got my Bitcoin on a ledger. I want to now stake and earn yield. Explain that process like I'm 5 years old.
So I don't know if Ledger supports us yet, but hopefully that will happen soon. But to talk maybe Xverse or Unisat, like a wallet that does have support, OKX, etc. So you can go to stake.CoreDAO.org. That's the main staking site. You always have the option of just broadcasting your own Bitcoin transaction as well. There's a staking tool that we've open sourced that will allow you to do that if you are more comfortable with crafting your own transactions, maybe don't want to use a hot wallet, which again, for every person, there's an option that meets their risk and trust parameters. But if you go to stake.CoreDAO.org, you can pick a validator, and it's a very intuitive process to pick the amount of Bitcoin that you want to stake. Most people optimize for the highest yield, They set a duration, fire off the Bitcoin transaction, and they're good to go. So it's quite simple. And the new version that will come out for dual staking is, I would say, at least 5 times more intuitive, because we're, again, increasing the surface area of your decision. Because again, now you have more matrices which to think about, because it's no longer core or Bitcoin, it's potentially core and Bitcoin. And then you can see different reward rates that you might receive based on the different amounts that you would stake. So we're really excited to bring that to the world quite soon. I don't know if we've shared any previews of that soon, but I'm quite proud of it. I've done a lot of like product director hat on that one. And I think it will be a really simple and intuitive thing that I expect other groups will model their stuff after.
Awesome. Explain Bitcoin LSTs in the context of what obviously Ethos done, and Lido and all the rest of it. How do they compare? How do those products compare to what it is that you guys are obviously about to get on the cook on your side of things?
I think it's important to flash back to ETH pre-LSTs first, and then talk about kind of how this all came to be. So if you go to DeFi in 2020, right, you had your Aves, your compounds, if you had all of these initial protocols that had some amount of success. DeFi Summer was amazing; it opened up so many new possibilities. I would argue that it wasn't until after the merge, when we started to see LSTs, that next wave really took off. And I think it was because now you have an ability to earn yield inside of these other protocols. So it allowed for your Pendles of the world, right? Your yield stripping. You have all these new possibilities that are very like TradFi-esque, if you will, right? Because now you have yield-bearing instruments natively for the first time. And that really kickstarted, at least in my mind, the next wave of DeFi and Ethereum, and continues to power it as more and more of these protocols continue to take the most interesting elements of TradFi, bring them into crypto, crypto-fi them, and kind of do other things on top of it. And what's very critically different about the Ethereum ecosystem and the Bitcoin ecosystem is Bitcoin has no native yield. And this is where Core takes over, where Core is the POS layer for Bitcoin. So we actually provide this yield for other folks to build on top of. So those same dual staking mechanics that I just laid out for you also apply to LSTs that are building on top of Core. So now these LSTs also, if you're against bringing your Bitcoin into the staking thing, you're also joining the Core community. So once again, you're now becoming part of this ecosystem. And in exchange for that, you now have Core's yield that you can pass back to your users that allows you to open up Pandora's box of these new DeFi primitives. And this is really, at least in my opinion, one of the big missing pieces that has plagued Bitcoin DeFi to this point, is there's been an absence of real yield. So like one of the reasons that the Core ecosystem has been able to scale as much as it has been is that there's real yield that's paid out. There's real protocols that are live. It's not just points. People are really sick of points. My opinion doesn't matter in this case. But so many people have been farmed, right? And like people are done with that. So now the opportunity to have real yield and to bring these into other protocols that will pay out their own yield on top of it opens up all these new and exciting possibilities. And this is going to be the next leg up, if you will, in what we see in the Bitcoin side, because now it's not just, a question of, is it decentralized custody or centralized custody? When you think about your wrapped Bitcoin derivative, it's what are the trust assumptions, what are the yield assumptions that I can bring into these protocols? And then what are the best protocols that I can use to go get more yield on top of it? And I think this will also help to encourage more and more of these Bitcoiners to slowly start to come on chain. Because now it's no longer a decision between stake your Bitcoin, come on chain. You can do both. And I think there'll be a bunch of low risk, quote unquote, again, not financial advice, do your own research, protocols that will allow you to add on a little bit of risk on top of your staking risk. You'll, again, have to deal with that bridging risk premia, et cetera. But I think that's how we'll start to see the floodgates, start to open over the next year, 2 years.
So, I mean, from a value accrual process, I mean, it's like, it is essentially like a domino effect. The more kind of like protocols that you have doing stuff that people are going to land up using, whether it's lending, borrowing, staking, trading, all of that kind of stuff, that just basically drives the machinery and creates that positive feedback loop. I mean, that's essentially what it is that you guys are seeking out, just coming back to kind of like the ethos. It's like, we want this thriving ecosystem. We stand to benefit from the fees that we derive, and then also, the way that our token is then used as this vehicle of value accrual. I mean, that's essentially what it is that you guys are promoting. I mean, am I right?
So I'd say the goal of Core is to build a self-sustaining, revenue-generating platform business. Okay. And the token is the common currency that enables that. And how I think about it, just like my mental model, and I might have used this on this podcast before, is I always tell people, like, the mental model to use for L1 blockchains is Salesforce, which is so unsexy when you think about it, but bear with me. The way to think about it is you build a platform, developers build on top of you. It's purely usage-based pricing. There's really no per seat models here. It's always usage-based. Those usage-based in the blockchain concept are transaction fees. Those transaction fees get paid to validators, and that's where the fee revenue generation comes from. You're directly aligned with the developers that build on top of you to encourage more transactions, more usage, to try to up those, like the revenue generating pieces of the business. And then on top of it, you will likely pick and choose different platform components, critical that they're platform versus dApps. Core will never launch a dApp itself, but you build some of these platform components that will also help raise the competitive set of the protocols that are building on top of your platform. So to give you an example, as part of Fusion, LST BTC, Core's Bitcoin LST will go live. And as part of that, the idea there is to have a healthy yield-bearing LST that other people will go compete with. And our goal is to lose. What we want is to make sure that there's healthy yields for these other LSTs that have to go get competed against. And that's also very similar to what happens with like a Salesforce, right? They have the basic version, and then there's all these companies that build these advanced versions on top of it. In that case, Salesforce takes a rake. We don't take a rake. But it's a good mental model because ultimately we have so many different audiences with which to satisfy. Because it's not just the developers, but we also have to go please the users. And by having a competitive ecosystem, that's going to lead to better net accretion and value and retaining critically of those users. So again, it's a very simple strategy. There's no like secret formula there. It's really just boils down to build stuff that people want. And again, all of that is used in the common currency of Core.
Wow, great explanation and great example. And I don't think you've used that example on this podcast before. I think I would have remembered. Yeah, it's good. It makes sense.
I'm a broken record. I'm an old man who's just a broken record at this point. So,
well, like you said, I mean, I think you are correct in saying that this is a long-term process around education, because I don't know, I've just found that when you go out there and especially when you present alpha to an audience, very few people are receptive to it, even when it's just like blatantly obvious. It takes like 2 or 3 attempts, and I'm sure you can relate to that as someone who is educating and is essentially making sense of something that might be deemed as being complicated. I don't think it is. I think it's pretty straightforward, but a lot of people struggle to get these concepts or come to terms with these concepts. I think most DeFi users get it. They understand the process, and they also understand kind of like the difficulties that come with this whole idea of what DeFi looks like, and that's something that I wanted to actually chat to you about is just coming back to user experience and what that entails, and how you guys have gone about not only educating but also how do we onboard these individuals, whether they're DeFi natives, whether they are complete Web 2 noobs. What has the philosophy been from a core perspective, wallets, all that kind of stuff? I know it's a big question, but I'm sure you've been asked this question in many forms. I'd love to hear what you guys have done to kind of tackle what I think is a huge, huge challenge.
So I think on average, it's something like 8 to 11 touch points. I know I've never brought this up in our conversations previously. I actually ran a sales tech business for like 7 years or so, and it was actually outbound call center software. So we helped sales reps make phone calls faster. So I'm very familiar with all aspects of outbound sales. And that also answers this next, kind of the next segue is there's so much of this that is, a traditional Web 2 model, if you will, regardless of who you're talking about. But it's important to, when asked, and again, like as the educator, to morph and, convey the key pieces of that message, because all of these different audiences are so different. And like to give you an example is like your institutional pitch is so much different than your like maybe staunch Bitcoin holder pitch. The amount of times people tell you to fuck off is much higher in the latter than the former. And when you talk about these different pieces, it's really just an exercise in getting people comfortable. And how I approach that is, commonly referred to as anti-selling. And what I mean by that is, like, if you don't feel comfortable, don't do it. Like, I'll be the first person to tell you that, because I want you to go stake your Bitcoin or get involved in Bitcoin DeFi, whatever else, whenever you're ready. Because if we try to force you, we bring you into stuff you're uncomfortable with, or suggest that you do stuff that you're uncomfortable with, the odds you have a bad time is pretty high. And like that's no good for any of us. And we're patient, right? Like the whole thing here is it's 10, 20 years, such a long time period here. My bet is that eventually you're going to get comfortable with probably Bitcoin staking, at least. Maybe you'll want to come on chain at some point. That's fine. But it's all about meeting people at what they're comfortable with. And again, for a lot of folks, that's a no. And that's okay. We might talk to you at some conference or something in the future, like we might cross paths again. And that's what we've noticed a lot is, a lot of these conversations kind of start with, hey, I'm never giving you my Bitcoin. Like you're the devil. And then you start talking, no, I don't want your Bitcoin. Please don't give it to me. And you go through 20 different, kind of iterations of that. And then what some people will do is they'll dip their toe in, maybe they're a large Bitcoin holder and they'll be like, I'll give you one Bitcoin, never ask me for anything else. And it's like, I'm not asking you, but regardless, if you want to put it on, go ahead. And then those natural people, 10 Bitcoin, 20 Bitcoin, like it just kind of crawls once they start to get used to the process. And that is, I think, very different about our approach than many of these other groups, because most people are just trying to juice their metrics heading into their token launch, right? Mm-hmm. And Core's been live since early 2023. We have the luxury of not doing that in the same way. And then I think we also have such a long-term time horizon. Like I've made it no secret that as soon as the Bitcoin ETFs in the United States can have Bitcoin yield associated with it, I want Core to be the first call. And that's a big focus for us. And like the only way we're going to do that is we have a really upstanding personality and reputation, and we kind of do things the right way from the very beginning. And that's very core to our ethos. So kind of a roundabout answer, but it's actually surprisingly effective to tell people, don't give me your Bitcoin, to actually get them to put their Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's another great answer. And it does definitely speak to the importance of having the long game in mind and what that long game looks like. I mean, it's critical to, I think there's not enough of that in the space. I mean, like you said early on, it's like people like to kind of like juice things up when it suits them, and then when it doesn't, they kind of like move on to the next thing. They get given a grant and they do what they need to do to make it look great. But I think it's really important that we get more of a mindset around long term. It's like it's important that you look after people and they'll in turn look after you, and you've got to get that symbiotic like relationship going. I think it works really well when you get it right with people in the space, because people are almost like craving it. I don't know if you found that as well, but like people crave that. Like it's actually easier to form and nurture long-term relationships in crypto than there is in any other space. And I've also had businesses and I've done some pretty cool stuff in my life. And I find that crypto from that perspective is probably like 90% easier than out in the real world, and it's because people don't have this general outlook of, okay, well, I want to do a long-term thing. They're all thinking about tomorrow and how much they can make tomorrow. And they don't think about, a month, 6, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. When we sit down and look at blockmates, we don't think about next year. We think about 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And it's cool because people pick that up and then they want to work with us, and then we do a lot better in the space, and I think we contribute better because of that. And it's great to see that you guys have got that mindset. Speaking of all the things you guys have done, that's great. Obviously, just gives confidence in what it is that you guys are building. But really curious, what's next? Like, what's cooking from that perspective? We spoke about, like onboarding here and there, doing stuff. I'm going to let you speak to that. Go for it.
Fusion will be the biggest release since the network went live. So much blood, sweat, and tears went into that. And that's going to be just a massive, massive release that we think will really help level up the platform to where it needs to be. And we're, again, super bullish on that. And that is pretty close to being released. I won't give an exact date just so my eng team doesn't kill me. But in general, it's, on the immediate horizon. From there, you're going to see us continue to add more features that are Bitcoin centric, but you're also going to see some general platform level upgrades that we're very excited about. And I think if we go back to something we might have talked about, way long in the past, it was local fee markets. And local fee markets will hopefully be in our next upgrade, the first version of it. And local fee markets, I've been, proselytizing for quite a while, but we need to get to the spot where you can have predictably fast and cheap transactions regardless of congestion on the network. It's one of the biggest unlocks. Solana really led the immediate charge here. We haven't really seen EVM environments do it. I think Core will be the first. So we're very, very excited about that. We actually just announced a collaboration with a NYU professor, Abdu Naye, who will be leading some of the research for us on that, has been collaborating with us closely now for several months. That's a big one for us. And I think there's kind of this emerging view that I'm starting to form that I will, share at some point here in the future in depth. But I think gas has for a long time been viewed negatively in these ecosystems, but it's also the lifeblood that makes a lot of these things work. And I think we're on the precipice of doing some very interesting things with gas. And this goes into, again, like trying to build the best platform. When you have this common currency that allows all of these different transactions to take place, how do you reward people? How do you think about maybe redistributing some of these different fees? There's a lot of different things that can be done there to unlock some new use cases. And we'll talk about this more, I think, probably the next time you and I jam as we get closer to launch. But you're going to see Core, let's call it, shift a little bit from being, just the best BTC-Fi platform to the best platform. And that's an important, mental shift that's important to think about, because when it comes to Bitcoin scaling, Core's number one in every metric. And if we were to say, hey, we just want to remain number one, that's boring, right? Like, that's not it. We have to go compete with bigger blockchains, more general purpose blockchains. It's not that we will ever forget about Bitcoin at all. That's always going to be the key to the story. But it's that we need to go after some of these other use cases as well, because we'll continue to, keep the foot on the gas on the Bitcoin side, but there's just more meat on the bone. And that's, again, the ultimate vision of like trying to build the biggest, baddest, Bitcoin scaling solution. You need to have these other general purpose features as well. And I'm super excited about that. My eng team will really kill me if I announce any dates around that, but I don't think that one's too far off in the future either.
Yeah, I mean, I can't help thinking about, what the biggest narratives are at the moment in the space. Bitcoin obviously being one of them. I think Bitcoin and Bitcoin DeFi is a huge narrative at the moment, whether you choose to recognize it or not. Second is obviously this AI thing, and it's been even before kind of like the AI agents and all these iterations and what's been happening. And then obviously probably the biggest thing that we have seen by far has been obviously this meme cycle, and Solana's obviously really done a great job, whether it was by design or whether it was by accident or whether it was a combination of the two, which I think it was. They've afforded themselves a huge amount of success. What that looks like, I don't know. I mean, that's something that we'll only find out later on. But is that something like from kind of like capturing narratives and being a part of those narratives important for you guys as Core? Or is it just about onboarding what is generally happening in the space and doing it at 110%? I mean, what are your thoughts around that? Is it a combination of the two? You know where I'm going with this.
Totally. I think it's important to also look back in history when Core launched. So when Core launched, no one cared about scaling Bitcoin for the most part. It was just a bunch of people who'd been in the space for a long time that said, no one else is out here scaling Bitcoin. Let's go do it. And again, this was before any of the ordinals, runes, BRC20, any of that really took off. And then, of course, we caught that narrative, but we were way in before that ever occurring and have benefited from it. But again, it was for the love of the game. And when I think about like narrative chasing, I think you can look at different ecosystems that are constantly bouncing from narrative to narrative. I won't name any, but they're just trying to capture, let's call it like marketing hype and that sort of thing. And that can be very accretive. like I'll never judge anyone for doing that. I think that could make for a lot of successful stories and potentially, very interesting, community value accrual. But for us, it's really a focus on solving real problems for real people. And we have our own list of things that we're trying to do. And hopefully we're two narratives ahead, right? Like that's the idea, is like do what other people haven't discovered yet. And then once it becomes, kind of more commonplace, ultimately a lot of that value gets commoditized. But that will always be the core thesis, is delivering real value to real people versus just chasing the hype. I think just chasing the hype, again, it can work. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's often short-lived. And it's really hard to take your community and like keep reorienting them, shifting them or whatever, because it's pretty obvious, on your fifth narrative in 6 months that you're, probably not building something for the long term. And that would just be very antithetical to our ethos. Do we care about the narratives? Do I lurk on crypto Twitter like 10 hours a day? Of course I do. But you haven't seen Core pivot to all these different things, because that's just not our game.
Yeah, that's also another great answer. It kind of like speaks to like, okay, well, this is the mission. The mission is build product. And if there is a narrative that gets caught up in a core product that we've built, that's cool. And we'll just go with it. And I appreciate that. And you're right. I think if you do chase narratives for the sake of chasing narratives, also that you can pump your token or whatever that might be, it's not going to land up being a long-term benefit. You're just going to land up being at the tail end of it. So before we sign off, just coming back to kind of like the way that this roadmap looks like for you guys. We obviously got Fusion. There's all these like really interesting kind of like derivations of, staking and how you guys have obviously thought long and hard about this. How do you now take all of this stuff, once again, from a user experience, exchanges, namely central exchanges, because they obviously are a big part of this gateway. I know that DeFi rails have been built into exchanges. Is that something that you guys are looking at doing? I think OKX are doing it, Bybit are doing it, where they do have kind of like a DeFi-centric connection between the central exchange and obviously the DeFi aspect. Is that something that you guys are looking at in order to kind of like eliminate that barrier to entry?
So I think many folks in crypto, when they launch a product, they think the story is over. And that's really when the story is just beginning. So to give you an example, like staking came out at Token 2049 Dubai, I think is when we announced it back in April. And again, there's been amazing progress so far. There's over $500 million that's staked, everything else. I think we just announced the first custodians that came online like a couple months ago. And there's many others that will now come online, will support dual staking. There's so much enablement. Again, going back to my sales tech background, like sales enablement is how you win deals. And there's a lot of work left to be done to even take our existing products and to get them to the scale that they need to be. And again, there's wallets, there's exchanges, there's custodians, there's so many different folks that, we in some ways help. Many just find on their own and kind of do it without ever involving us, which of course we always love. But there's just still so much work to be done there, even on the existing products. And I think that's like the other, kind of challenge to think about, going back to my Salesforce analogy, is you've got your, biannual releases or whatever that is, where you upgrade, you add new features, whatever, but it doesn't mean you stop supporting the existing stuff. And we're now in this fortunate spot where we have a, long tail of awesome products that we need to keep developing, supporting, adding, new features to, whatever else. And that's, again, a very fortunate spot to be in, but there's still so much work left to be done. But I would expect an increase in velocity and some of the existing support for our existing products and for announcements to be heading that way.
Yeah, there's so many questions that come to mind. I know that I said like I wanted to wrap it up, but it's like I've got to ask you, like from a developer's perspective, and I wanted to kind of like afford you the opportunity to perhaps kind of like put in not an appeal, but maybe there's something that you guys would love to see on the core network that maybe you haven't seen come through your doors, or like, is there anything right now, like if you had to look at, obviously lending and borrowing and the whole thing, is there like an opportunity from a business development perspective for like a DEX, like a perps DEX, for example? Is that something that you guys have taken care of? Like, what are the kind of like the missing pieces right now for you guys from an ecosystem perspective?
So we always encourage amazing builders to come build on Core, regardless if there's different folks that have already launched something. Like,
Yeah.
I think what you see in a lot of these ecosystems is like one group gets big and then it's like, oh, it's impossible to ever take them down. Like, let me go to something else. And it's like, no, that's not usually a good strategy. In most things, it's usually not the first one that wins. It's usually like the second or third, right? Like, you want to be Google, you don't want to be Alta Vista, right? Like, and we that's probably aging me relative to so many people that listen to this podcast. But in general, like, there's just so many of these things that, yes, there's a version on Core already, but go build a better one, right? Like, let markets solve this. Like, that's what markets are so good at. Like, I think in markets, my brain works, and that's what's so amazing about crypto is it's open competition. I think one of the areas that's been underexplored, and like, I've said this ad nauseum over like the last year, is products meant for Bitcoin holders. And we finally have seen some of these start to emerge on Core, but I don't think any are winners yet. And a good example of this is just like simple CDP protocols that are Bitcoin backed, or more specifically now Bitcoin LST backed. And if you think about it, upside exposure to Bitcoin, leverage on your Bitcoin in dollars, that unlocks so much for Bitcoin holders. And I'm still very long that these are the first protocols in Bitcoin DeFi that will hit a billion in TVL and then decabillions in TVL in short order, because it meets a real need for a lot of Bitcoin holders. It's low risk, yield bearing based on Core's yield, and again gives you other benefits. And I think what's also critical, and like people always hate me when I say this, those can be really good businesses without a token. And that's the problem of like why so many people haven't launched these things, is like a lot of Bitcoin holders, you're going to gain more trust if you probably don't have a token, right?
100%.
And
Yes.
that's a hard mental model for people to think through. And it's like, all right, you get to $10 billion in some of these protocols, you're clipping 1% or like some DeFi premium or whatever. That's a great business. Like, you're like people just don't think about this because we're so conditioned in crypto to just go token to token. Like, that's just what the end game is for so many people. And I think what we've been, like kind of proselytizing for a while is you want to launch your token when you have scale, right? Like that's the best, most optimal like way to do that. And you don't want to do it on day one, but that's just antithetical to how so many people view these businesses, whether it's based on their investors or whatever else. Just the incentives aren't aligned. But I think some of these, more Bitcoin centric protocols, they're going to launch. Someone's going to make it their baby, which is always what I tell people to do. They're going to be patient with the token, and they're going to build an absolute monster.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely in agreement with you. Like when we meet up and coming protocols, the question I ask is like, when are you launching a token? And when they say soon, I always respond and say, just don't do it now. Like one of the key ingredients to success in this space is to take value and impart it to your community and actually make them wealthy. If you can do that, one of the reasons why Ethereum is done so well and has such a ridiculously staunch following is because they minted so many millionaires that despite the fact that people don't really want to use the product anymore, and I know people are going to hate me for it. Listen, I'm also an ETH maxi, like I love Ethereum, but right now the value doesn't lie within the confines of Ethereum, and it's kind of like, where's the value? The value's got to be with giving people something back, and you don't need a token to do that. And if you do a token, make sure that the token is actually your delivery of value, not robbing your protocol of the value, which happens probably 98% of the time. So find product market fit, take your time, create value, create fees, create a business, and then give that value to your loyal community. And that's the opposite way of doing things, but people don't see that. And as soon as we see that change, then I believe we'll stop talking about protocols, we'll stop talking about projects, and we'll start talking about businesses. And that's where we need to get to. You're running a business, sir. You are running a business that provides an environment for people to come and be profitable and offer a service that actually makes things better, not worse, not riskier. That's what you're doing. And then you benefit from that, and so do they. And that's the way it should be, I think, anyways.
Couldn't be any more philosophically aligned. I think that's also the perfect note to close on. You said it perfectly.
Cool. Rich, always a pleasure. Do appreciate these chats, your insights, and more importantly, your dedication to what it is that you guys are doing. It's great. It's infectious. Appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Take it easy, sir.
Likewise, sir. Chat again.
Cool. Thanks everyone for joining us. Join us next time. Take it easy. We'll see you then. Bye.
Quick one, nothing here is financial advice. It's for entertainment and educational purposes only. Always do your own research or speak to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions. Like and subscribe.